Sorry for all the mess, but this is the last show in our series for all practical purposes. And as usual with conclusions, it gives us a chance to look at what we've seen and to underline some of the main messages. Well, I guess the major message of this series is that mathematics is important. Important not in some abstract sense or for other people, the physicists, the engineers, the technocrats, but for all of us. I mean, we were only able to look at just a few areas of mathematics in this series. But even in those few areas, we saw an amazing array of applications. The practical purposes of mathematics affect us all in very personal and direct ways. Well, we could have presented mathematics as a series of formal technical procedures, but instead, we focused on concepts with very concrete application. When we looked at statistics, we could have done some dry computations. But instead, we looked at how real data were collected, organized, and interpreted. And that data was far from abstract. I mean, for those of us who were concerned about the draft and military service in Vietnam, what could be more personal than the 1970 draft lottery data? To eliminate distinctions among men eligible for the draft, Congress decided to allow chance to determine who was selected for military service in Vietnam. Birth dates for all men born between 1943 and 1952 were drawn at random and assigned selection numbers in the order drawn. Men whose birth date matched selection number 1 were drafted first.
September 14th.
September 14, 001.
Sounds random enough, but the drawing was mishandled. The capsules were not thoroughly mixed, so the December dates, which were put in last, remained on top and had a greater chance of being drawn early.
December 7th.
Men born in December were drafted and sent to Vietnam in greater numbers than those born in January. Let's see if we can spot the inequity in the 1970 draft lottery. Here's a scatter plot of all 366 birth dates and their corresponding selection numbers. Remember that a low selection number nearer the bottom of this graph means being drafted earlier. But the alleged association between late birth dates and low selection numbers isn't easily seen. In fact, we seem to be looking at a random scatter of points. Here, we are replacing each month's points on the scatter plot with a box whose ends are at the upper and lower quartiles. These box plots allow instant comparison of selection numbers month by month. A line within each box indicates the median. To make things even clearer, let's draw a line connecting the medians. The misfortune of men born late in the year is evident. To prevent a repetition of this snafu, statisticians from the National Bureau of Standards designed a new and genuinely random selection process for the 1971 lottery. 2 drums were used. One contained birth dates, the other selection numbers. The capsules in both drums were thoroughly mixed, and then a randomly drawn birth date was paired up with a randomly drawn selection number.
April 27. April 27.
235. 235.
When we add to our plot the medians of the reformed 1971 lottery, we can see the difference. There's a good bit of random variation in the 1971 medians, but no systematic trend as in 1970. The point is that while there's some natural built-in variability, this kind of mathematical analysis can help us create procedures that we all recognize as fair. Well, there's no military draft today, and hopefully we'll never have to deal with forced conscription into the armed services again. But statistics will continue to affect us in countless ways, from the kind of jobs that we can get, to the kind of products that we buy, even to the television programs that we're allowed to watch. Now, most of these things are based on very formal and rigorous surveys. And to show you how important that kind of formal statistical technique is, I tried to do one of the strangest things I had to do in this series, namely go out and take an unemployment survey of my own, armed with just a clipboard and a pencil. taking an employment survey. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
No, I'm not really interested, sorry.
Excuse me, I'm taking a survey. Do you have a job? Okay. Excuse me, taking a survey. Are you working?
Pardon?
Are you working?
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm taking an employment survey. I wonder if I could ask you a couple of questions.
No, I don't think so.
Excuse me, I'm taking an unemployment survey. Do you currently have a job?
Oh, yeah.
No, I don't. No.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
No.
Are you currently working?
Yes.
And you?
Yeah.
What a survey. Oh, mind if I asked you a couple of questions?
No, thanks.
Could you tell me if you currently have a job?
Ooh. What?
Currently have a job.
You looking for a job?
Well, by this point, I was getting pretty discouraged. And I was worried that approaching only safe, respectable-looking people was biasing my sample. So I decided to try another tack.
Could you do me a favor? I'm having a real hard time asking people whether they're employed or not. No one's talking to me. Could you ask the crowd, maybe?
Just ask him how
Just ask them how many people, show of hands, how many people have got a job, how many people are unemployed.
How many of you people are here at Faneuil Hall? All right, Scott. Another question. No, they get harder. How many of you people here have a job? We here at Faneuil Hall are doing a brief exit poll.
Well,
How many people
I got a number,
without work?
but what does it mean? Is it a decent snapshot of the national unemployment rate? Probably not. After all, I'm in a city whose economy is doing quite well right now.
What's more, this is a pretty popular tourist attraction. So what with one thing and another, the people who are passing by here are hardly representative of the population as a whole. Meanwhile, you've probably noticed that I'm not doing all that well getting a cross-section of the people who are here. Some people aren't being very cooperative.
Not really.
Then there's another problem. Just how many people do I have to ask before I can be reasonably confident that the percentage of unemployed people I'm getting means anything? And when I do get a figure, how do I express my confidence in it? I think that this is about right, sort of.
Fortunately, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does it right. They take a large enough sample to be able to announce their results with a high degree of confidence. And they guard against bias in taking that sample, and of course, undue political influence. Well, maybe saying that mathematics affects our daily lives doesn't sound like much. I mean, after all, we live in an increasingly technological society. So it sounds like a truism. Certainly, mathematics is applied to science, engineering, and technology. But we're really saying something more. Mathematical models are being used to analyze both our political and our social choices. We looked at elections, and we saw how the outcome of an election can depend on the voting method we choose. Arrow's theorem tells us that there is no perfectly fair voting system. And game theory permits us to analyze conflict and helps us to negotiate and to resolve differences. The lesson is that being able to understand mathematics can help us directly in the personal decisions we make. You know, I'm a pretty serious fisherman, and whenever I'm not too busy working on mathematics, I head for the nearest place to cast my line. Well, this is a pretty good spot that I found, and I can usually catch my limit here by mid-afternoon. Now, my individual preference would be to stay here all day and to keep all of the fish that I can catch. But what if everybody did that? Before long, the fish population will be hopelessly depleted, and no one will be able to enjoy fishing here. My personal preference for an unlimited catch is disastrous if everyone adopts it. This is called the tragedy of the commons because it represents what happens to a common resource, such as fish in the pond, if everyone pursues the goal of maximizing individual gain. The most common response to a tragedy of the commons dilemma is regulation, usually by some organization that represents all of the players. Sometimes effective regulation is very difficult to enact.
Dr. Cohen's a man, and he's going to check out your heart and your stomach today, okay?
As a society, for example, we're traditionally reluctant to tell parents how to care for their children. For many years, pediatricians have recommended vaccinating infants to protect them from diseases like whooping cough. Dr. Anita Fine.
Whooping cough is quite serious. The death rate is 1 in 300 in children less than a year. Here at the plan, we've seen one child with it last year. It is a very long illness, and in fact is called a disease of 100 days, and often the children are very sick for a very long time. Thanks for coming.
Oh, sure.
Babies usually receive 4 DPT shots. The P is for pertussis, the medical name for whooping cough, between age 3 months and 18 months.
And I want to tell you a little bit about it before we give it so that you'll know what to expect.
The vaccine, however, is not 100% safe. Every year, several dozen vaccinated infants suffer seizures, brain damage, and sometimes death. Parents are becoming understandably concerned about this risk.
If I'm dealing with a parent who's had many children, and this is another one, and they feel very confident about the low risk of problems with the immunization, then I tend to have few questions. But recently, with the amount of information being spread about the side effects of the DPT shot, we often ask questions. And we have a handout explaining the side effects. I never give the immunization unless the parent really feels that it's the right thing to do for their child. Thanks.
So what should a parent do? Partly as a result of the vaccination policy, whooping cough has almost disappeared in the United States. The individual family may therefore be tempted to refuse the risk of vaccination. But if every parent adopted this strategy, the enormous gains made in eliminating the disease would be wiped out.
Oh, that little guy. You're going to be all right.
What's so truly exciting here is that the mathematics underlying our analysis of decision-making has all been discovered in the last 40 years. It isn't simply that new areas of application are constantly being uncovered, but that major new areas of mathematics are being developed. These developments can give us a fresh way of looking at our world. And people of power and responsibility haven't been slow to take advantage of it. The decisions made by government planners, economists, and businessmen used to be strictly seat-of-the-pants affairs, and I'm sure some still are. But the information these decision makers are getting from mathematical models has a much greater sway than ever before. To understand the underlying mathematics is to understand and be able to participate in that decision-making process. If we opt out of mathematics, then in essence, we give away our power. We say, in effect, you make my decisions for me. But those decisions are just too important. In politics, they form the basis for participating as citizens in our democracy. In economic terms, they control the financial well-being of individuals and institutions. For example, it's almost impossible to find a major business today whose economy isn't based on mathematical analysis. When we looked at management science, we saw how efficient routes for almost every imaginable street service can be found analyzing graphs. Linear programming can help determine everything from how much home heating oil versus gasoline was refined to how much pork or veal was in our hot dogs. The transportation industry is using new mathematical techniques almost as soon as they're discovered. And we're not simply talking about wing design or engine efficiency. Hardly a day goes by when we don't hear about airline delays or overcrowded airports. Even in a nitty-gritty world of airline scheduling, mathematics plays an essential role.
The question here is not how to get somewhere in the shortest possible amount of time, but rather how to finish a sequence of tasks in the shortest possible time. Eastern's Bill Rodenheiser explains.
A typical aircraft turn is accomplished in 45 to 60 minutes. Basically what happens, the aircraft arrives, it is secured, passengers are offloaded. That process will take anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes. As soon as the last passenger off, the cleaners will be on board to clean the aircraft and ready it for its southbound departure. The caterers will have catered it, and maintenance will have checked the logbook and secured any items that be needed for a maintenance. While this is being done, outside the ramp servicemen will be unloading the cargo, the mail, freight, and bags, and the fueler will be fueling the aircraft for its southbound trip. This will be adjusted during the off weather or bad weather days or heavy air traffic delays and whatnot, but we're all working under a time frame.
Let's simplify things by assuming that there are only 5 things that we have to do before a plane is ready to depart.
Unload the old passengers, unload the old cargo, clean the cabin, load the new cargo, and load the new passengers.
Now, we know how long each step takes, and we know that certain things have to be done first. We can't, for example, load the new passengers till the old passengers have gotten off and the cabin's been cleaned.
This graph shows the 5 tasks with the time each one takes. We start at the left, work through all of the tasks, and finish up at the right. The arrows show where one task has to be finished before another can begin. The shortest path in the graph is B through D. That only takes 47 minutes to complete, which is the sum of B and D's task times. But in order to do the whole job, we also have to accomplish tasks A, C, and E.
Paradoxical as it may seem, if we want to find the shortest completion time for this network, what we have to do is find the longest path. What we're concerned with here is not the fastest time through the graph, it's the fastest time by which all the tasks can be completed.
Instead of looking for the minimum time path, we go for the maximum time path. That leads us to this path for this particular problem, which tells us that it takes 55 minutes to complete all these tasks. That means the airline folks aren't leaving themselves much of a margin when they plan to turn an airplane around in 1 hour, something people who fly often have occasion to notice.
The importance of mathematics in business is undeniable, and these applications have been enormously advanced by the development of the modern computer. When we looked at computers in this series, we traced their history from a concept that was invented to help define the notion of proof to a working electronic computational device. We saw how a mathematical idea is helping to change the idea of mathematics. Recall how the computer allows us to explore new worlds, to boldly go where no man is... Wrong series. Back to practical matters. Let's look at one way in which the computer is helping to change things, even creative things like composing music. The secret is the binary system, a mathematical idea that's been around for a long time, but it becomes enormously powerful when it's translated into the electronic circuitry of a computer.
In binary, the 2 symbols we use are 0 and 1. To see how place value works in binary, imagine we've just bought a new high-tech car with 2 odometers. The top odometer is a decimal counter, while the bottom one is binary. As we count up from 0 through 1, the displays are identical, but there's no single symbol for 2 in binary. Instead, we begin a new column. This number, which is read as 10 in binary, is equal to 2 in decimal. The second binary column, in other words, keeps track of how many 2's we have. When we get to 4 in decimal, we've exhausted all the binary symbols in 2 columns, and we have to begin another. The third column in binary represents how many 4's are contained in the number. The symbols 0 and 1 are called binary digits, or bits for short. So we can say that the number 4 in decimal requires 3 bits in its binary representation. As we jump up to higher numbers, we can see the place value pattern. Each column represents a new power of 2, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and up, the equivalent of 1, 2, 4, 8, and so on in decimal. Each power of 2 requires 1 more bit in the binary representation.
Now that we're familiar with the binary system, let's see how it's actually used in a computer to process information. When we play a note on the synclavier's keyboard, the computer inside automatically encodes the music into binary symbols.
Every key has its own binary value beginning at 0. For instance, middle C on the synclavier is key number 27, so it has the value 11011. The next lower C would be 15, and so on.
Here's a sequence that I've entered into the recorder, and let me play the tracks for you one at a time. First starting with the hi-hat cymbal, snare drum, bass drum, cowbell, triangle, conga drums, and then we add the electric bass and then double the electric bass with the steel drums. So then we can come back to our directory of sounds and call up a set of vibes, for instance, and now I can record the vibes along with this prearranged track.
Fred can easily make changes in the composition by causing the computer to perform specific arithmetic operations on the coded numerical information.
Now we can instantly hear the vibes played back. We can speed that track up.
Tempo changes result from percentage calculations of the time duration between notes.
Slow it back down. We can transpose it.
To raise the melody one octave, for instance, the computer adds 12 to the binary value of the original notes.
And we could change instruments.
Each instrument is a string of binary values that represents its unique sound quality separate from the value of the notes.
And we can substitute the flute for that, playing the same notes and the same rhythms. And once all of this music has been entered into the computer via the keyboard or the terminal, it can then be printed out on a number of different kinds of printers to give you a hard copy on paper that you can then give to other musicians so that they can play the music that you have composed and arranged via the synclavier.
So mathematics is important, it's personal, and it's practical. And you know, it's also somehow, well, beautiful. Now, in one sense, that beauty is what the practitioner sees. I mean, the internal consistency of the logic, the way seemingly different problems have common solutions, the way different strands come almost mystically together. But there's another sense of beauty that we can all appreciate. When we looked at size and shape, we saw that mathematics is the study of patterns, both natural and man-made. And some of the images emerging from that study can be very spectacular indeed. The senses delight in things duly proportional. That fundamental truth of aesthetics is as meaningful today as it was back in the 13th century when Thomas Aquinas mused about our physical world. He was expressing the direct and very often measurable relationship that exists between mathematics and beauty, a relationship that applies both to natural beauty and to man's art. This kinship falls into the sometimes exotic domain of geometry. Spheres, circles, lines, curves, and triangles can be found in many natural things. These shapes represent the simple and straightforward alliance between mathematics and organic beauty.
Since the beginning of civilization, man has observed these patterns in nature and attempted to mimic their geometric consistency. Indeed, patterns built out of simple shapes are the surviving signatures of ancient cultures. The first steps to understanding the anatomy of man. The foundations of art. And the gateway into strange and different expressions of imaginary worlds.
So we've examined management science, statistics, size and shape, social choice, and we've seen some of the mathematics that underlies the computer. We've looked at graphic images and some of the formal structures that support them. And we've met some of the people who put mathematics to work.
People like Dick Bresciani, statistician for the Boston Red Sox.
Baseball fans do have a love affair with statistics. There's absolutely no doubt about it, and I think it's the greatest statistic game that there is.
Here's how it works.
Connie Moore, quality control engineer for AT&T.
The August data show a moderation
Janet Norwood, commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
that we've experienced for more than a year and a half.
What we're going to do today is lay out a small building. Oh, let's say a 30 by 40 building. How's that?
Charles Roselli, he teaches surveying to civil engineering students.
40 foot for the frontage, 30 for the depth.
You still have angels and devils alternating.
Mathematical giant H.S.M. Coxeter.
Two angels' feet opposite each other and devils between them. But now the wingtips are differently arranged.
Let's see what's happening right now on the weather map. The
Weatherman Dick Albert.
Good news.
And all of us who use mathematics. Of course, we've barely scratched the surface. Mathematics is a vast field with a history as long as that of human thought. And new applications of both old and new mathematics are being discovered every day. You know, mathematics has been called the language of science, the queen of the sciences. That's very pretty, but it's too austere. It leads to presenting mathematics as a subject outside of our other experiences. But mathematics isn't just a collection of ancient techniques useful only to a few. Rather, it's alive, it's dynamic, and constantly renewing itself. And the new applications of mathematics are changing our world for all practical purposes. Well, I guess that's a wrap.